Right, I think we're about ready to start. Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Brendan Ryan. I'm the National Lead for Social Care and Social Work at Hayes, and I'm delighted to welcome our two guest speakers who will be joining me in a panel discussion, delving into the findings of our report and taking questions from you. And to do so, you can submit your questions as we work through the session using the Q&A button, which hopefully you can see in your screen, and we'll endeavour to get through as many questions as we can. Joining me today, we have Niall Kelly and David Thompson. Niall is a respected, experienced Chief Executive Officer, leading both MHC and Young Foundations. MHC operates a small number of independent hospitals, care homes and nursing and residential care for adults across England and Wales. And Young Foundations operate children's homes, schools and residential care for children and young adults. David Thompson is the CEO of Initio Group, one of the UK's largest providers of supported accommodation in the 16+ space. He's also chair of the Northwest Providers Forum and can boast previously being the UK's youngest registered manager, achieving dual registration at the age of 21. David's also founded the National Sales Conference, which takes place in 2 weeks' time. It's a dedicated conference for the supported accommodation sector and an opportunity to showcase best practice from across the country. And I'm sure you can reach out to David via social media if you are interested in that. Niall, David, thank you both for giving up your time to join us today.
Yeah, you're more than welcome.
Now, before I take you through a snapshot of the survey findings, I just want to give you some background into our survey. This year's annual survey saw a 50% rise in engagement on last year, which we're really pleased about. So I'd like to thank everyone who engaged and contributed to making this year's report so valuable. We received over 900 responses from employers and professionals working across social care and social work, and responses came from a range of seniority levels and job titles. Our guide this year also includes the average salary information for hundreds of roles across the sector, which you will be able to access after this session. So on to our findings. Before I start, I'll just let you know that you will be able to access the full report after the session, so don't worry if you miss some of the many statistics that I will share during my presentation. Now, in line with what we all know, organisations are currently facing a number of challenges. Within social care, employers say that their top external challenge will be the rising cost of living for staff. 75% of organisations responded. While internally they've faced the challenge of retaining talent, 71% of organisations responding to that effect. And these two factors are intrinsically linked. As a result, the long-term outlook for both employees and employees towards the wider economy has taken a downward turn when compared to last year. However, it's important to recognise that employees are more significantly less optimistic than employers in this respect. Despite this reported drop in optimism, hiring plans are still expected to proceed as employers require the right staff in place to be able to meet their organisational and care objectives in the year ahead. Within social care, 93% of employers plan to hire staff in the next 12 months, almost no change from last year. It was 94% last year. Clearly, less optimism doesn't necessarily equate to less activity. 82% of organisations are planning to hire permanent staff this year, whilst 35% will continue to hire temporary staff in the year ahead. And we can see the challenge created by widespread skill shortages for organisations has grown over the past 12 months from what was an already high bar. 97% of social care employers faced skill shortages in the last year, rising from 91% the year before. Furthermore, those facing extreme skill shortages has risen from 21% to 27% this year. Skills gaps are negatively impacting employee morale. 60% of organisations report that as the case. Care delivery, with 56% of organisations reporting so, and causing an increased agency cost base as well. 47% of organisations have found that to be the case in the past 12 months. These are amongst other challenges, which include reduced occupancy and potential limitations on growth opportunities. In the year ahead, 80% of social care employers expect to face a shortage of suitable applicants when recruiting, and 60% anticipate competition from other employers. There's been a significant rise in employers expecting to face applicants with unrealistic salary requirements when hiring in the year ahead, up to 52% this year compared to just 38% last year. Which brings me on to what actually happens with salaries. So over the last year, almost 3/4 of employers, 73% of those who responded, increased their workforce's salaries outside of the April 2022 increase in the national minimum wage, compared to just 60% who did so the year before. And 71% of those organisations say these pay rises are a direct result of the rising cost of living. Salaries increased by an average of 4.8% across the social care sector over the last 12 months, in comparison to 3.8% the year before. The highest increases were in social care at 6.5%, compared to a 2.5% average increase across the social work roles. And looking more closely, we can see that the salary increase was greater amongst the children's care providers at 7.3% versus 5.7% in the adult care sector. Now, looking forward, pay increases are set to continue. Obviously, we have the imminent April increase in the national minimum wage due, but beyond that, a further 62% of employers expect to increase their salaries further in the year ahead outside of that increase. So, against what remains a challenging backdrop, let's have a closer look at what may drive employee behaviours. It's no surprise, and shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, to see that social care professionals rank the work itself as the top factor that provides the most job fulfilment. And this is followed by the values and the culture of an organisation, and then the pay that they receive. Of those who moved jobs in the last 12 months, an unfulfilling job was the top reason for the move, actually replacing a salary that was too low in the top spot. A lack of career progression and development opportunities were also key drivers of employee movement over and above pay. And this suggests that the movement on pay that we've seen over the past 12 months is having an impact. When you contrast the drop in optimism amongst employees this year and the impact that may have on retention moving forward, against the expectation from most providers for activity to remain constant or indeed grow in the year ahead, there's an onus on employers to actively communicate the positive opportunities and plans within their organisations to their staff. Because what we see in 2023 is 61% of professionals plan to change jobs. While pay is obviously an important reason for employees to want to move role, this isn't the only factor that matters. Career progression and development opportunities are highly valued by employees in this sector. And when considering a new role, however, almost a quarter, 24%, do not believe that there is scope for career progression within their current organisation. Flexible working approaches are also important to attract talent. 42% of professionals value having flexible, personalised shift rotas. Furthermore, where you're able to offer hybrid working to staff, flexibility is crucial. 53% of professionals could be tempted to change organisation if they could choose how often they're in the workplace when working in a hybrid way. And now a very quick look at EVP, which we will feature in more detail in our discussion. Having a strong employee value proposition plays an important part in finding and retaining talent. As you can see, our research shows that an organisation's purpose, the commitment to sustainability, and their ability to show a diverse and inclusive culture are all important considerations for social care staff searching for a new role. So knowing what you do well and communicating that effectively, both internally and externally, is key. That was just a brief snapshot of some of the findings of our report. As I want to use the time we have available to us on this session to focus on the discussion. But rest assured, you will be able to access the full report with all the detail included, including the key salary information. But I will finish my presentation with some of our recommendations on how to find and retain social care staff in a tough hiring market. And we'll be taking a deeper dive into these with our guest speakers shortly. First, it's a good time to revisit your hiring strategy and to ensure it's fit for purpose. For example, many employers identify rising agency costs as a challenge in the year ahead. So consider how you can best leverage your agency spend to maximize your return on investment. Make sure you're exploring all possible avenues when hiring. Could you actively hire staff from the older or the younger age groups? And perhaps you can consider hiring professionals from outside the sector and invest in their upskilling. To be successful, ensure your attraction strategies are tailored to specific demographics. And importantly, your onboarding processes are agile. Create pay structures that are suitable for all staff. What we can see in the report is that salary dissatisfaction stems from frustrations around pay, not reflecting responsibilities or experience. So building pay structures that reward longevity in a role and increased responsibilities can help with staff retention. Promote clear career progression pathways. Employees want to have the opportunity for career development. So promoting clear pathways, investing in training, and working with staff to create development plans are all crucial in retaining staff. And it's about knowing what appeals and where your gaps are. Exit interviews obviously feature quite heavily in the sector, but increasingly we're seeing organisations conduct stay interviews and retention interviews as well to find out what's actually working. Activity in that space will help. Lastly, build a strong EVP, which is the backbone to any good candidate attraction strategy. Create that positive narrative around why somebody should join your organisation, from flexible working patterns and shift rotas through to your organisation's purpose and culture, and ensure this is effectively promoted to candidates externally. So that pretty much concludes my presentation. I now want to bring in Niall and David to explore the findings of our report in some more detail and indeed share their experiences from their organisations. So Niall, David, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And welcome to the call once again.
Yeah, thanks.
I'd like to start with a question straight into the nitty-gritty, really, around creating pay structures that support staff retention. So the pressures of the rising cost of living are a leading reason for more employers to increase pay than expected. And employers are also expect salaries to continue increasing outside of the national minimum wage in the year ahead. However, our research shows that around half of all professionals are still unhappy with their pay, saying it doesn't reflect their responsibilities, their individual performance, or their experience. So Niall, coming to you first, how can employers ensure that their pay structures reward all staff and therefore help with staff retention?
Thank you, Brendan. And thanks for the opportunity to join this panel and to be part of the launch of the Hays Salary Guide report. I think it's fantastic that Hays undertake this work for the sector, and it's a real valuable tool to me in my role. So I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to be part of the webinar, but also to benefit from the report again, as I've done for many years now. Creating a pay structure in MHC was one of my key tasks when I was appointed as CEO in September 2020. When I arrived, the organization was in a bit of a mess, really, in relation to pay, and that the pay that we were offering our support workers was very much linked to the national minimum wage. So in September 2020, we were paying our support workers £8.73, which was just 1 penny above the national minimum wage at the time. This was given to me as a reason why the organization was finding it hard to attract and retain good quality staff. And as a result, our services were of mixed quality and some were poor. And there was a straight line being drawn between the pay that we offered and the quality of our services that we were able to provide our patients and residents. Straight away, I felt that we needed to break the link between MHC and the pay that we paid for our support workers and the national minimum wage. So the first thing that I did was set up a salary scale, because previously there were just salary points where if you were a support worker, this was your pay. So with consultation with many others, we developed a salary scale that immediately broke the link at the bottom of that scale with the national minimum wage and created a top of the scale to reward people who'd been enrolled for a number of years and were very good at their job. That was revolutionary to our staff team. They felt this was a culture change moment where their work was being viewed differently and they were being valued differently. It also helped with our recruitment and retention because we began to see more people being attracted to the work because they could see that we were willing to pay, we were willing to step away from the national minimum wage in the pay that we were offering our workers. As a consequence, our salaries have risen quite steeply since September 2020. And nearly next month, April of this year, our bottom line salary will go to £10.91. So that is a 25% increase on salaries in 2.5 years. The top of the scale will actually be £11.60, which is a 33% increase. So you can see how hard we've had to work to bring our salaries into line with employee expectations, the demands that are placed upon them to meet their commitments because of the rising cost of living, and the challenges that we have to be a competitive employer in a market, especially where MHC operates, which is very rural. So there is not an awful lot of people living in the area where, look, we operate our services. So we have to be super competitive with our salary rates. The benefits of the organization have been huge. So our quality has improved, our offering to our residents and patients has improved, and therefore occupancy has improved. So we've got a more virtuous circle going on at the moment, but that journey has been tough.
Thank you, Niall. I think it's really interesting to hear your experience of the impact of rising that pay and on retention, but also on the outcomes for your organisation. I think it's a good story to hear.
Yeah, I think we couldn't do it unless we saw a tangible benefit to the residents and patients. Otherwise, you, as everybody who operates in a senior role know, that you're not just working with single issues. All of the issues are interlinked and interconnected. And staff welfare and staff well-being is very important to us, but it has to be connected to patient outcomes. You know, if it isn't, then why are you doing it? Because the ultimate beneficiary should be that the patients and residents have better outcomes, and we have seen that at MHC.
So it's a win-win in that sense.
Yes, yeah, very much so.
Great. David, do you have any views on these challenges relating to pay?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Niall touched on a really fair point, and I think you can summarize it in the sense of a belief in brand. You know, if you have a genuine belief in what your service is delivering and the outcomes that can reach for young people, and you can kind of portray that belief to your workforce, but also to the commissioners who are purchasing that service for their demographic, and you can evidence those outcomes based on quality and success, then I think it's an uphill battle trying to get those fees applied on a localized basis. But if you can do that on an evidence-based manner, then it is achievable, and I think that's a real positive example of how well it can work, and it is the basis of if you pay cheap, you're bringing in cheap, you're delivering cheap, and actually what all of our clients, all of our service users need is quality, you know, and unfortunately quality costs. And I think if you can create a culture whereby you're transparent around that cost and you're transparent around why that uplift is needed, or you're transparent to your staff as to why a certain salary uplift is allocated rather than another, then you're getting that buy-in from people collectively. You know, on our side, we run an open book accounting process for all of our commissioning partners. And equally, we share a very transparent approach with all of our workforce to outline, you know, when we can do something, we will. And if we've done it, it's in your best interest. And if we can't do it, this is the rationale behind it. You know, and we've had a very similar journey, you know, over the past 2.5 years. We've increased salaries on average by 19.8%. And we're in a very difficult circumstance because we're an unregulated sector heading into regulation with a huge amount of unknown in front of us. And we're competing with children's residential, which, as we all know, is one of the most costly sectors in relation to salaries and overheads. So when we're trying to compete with similar staffing levels, wanting the same kind of outcomes, but actually our income is significantly different, we then have to look at how we build on that separately. And I guess that's where it comes into things like EVP.
Okay. And that challenge for both of you, I imagine, is only going to become greater post-April. Obviously, the latest increase in NMW is the largest for some time. So I like the idea of the virtuous circle you've created, Niall. But I imagine you're going to face cost pressures moving forward as a result of the latest. How do you maintain, or how do you intend to maintain the differentials in pay that you've built in over the last 2 years?
Not easily is the only answer to that. David has alluded to the fact that we're also seeing downward pressure on fees. You know, so it's across all of social care. Our local authority colleagues are explaining to us that their you know, kind of budgets are shrinking, and they're being asked to make cost savings, not to give fee increases. But the cost of delivering care, especially the high quality care in both of our organizations, does cost money. And so we can't maintain that differential that you've described, Brendan, without corresponding fee increases to pay for the care. Equally, if you attempt to do it the other way, if you attempt to hold fees where they currently are, but whilst also responding to the rising costs, well, then you put the whole organization at risk. And we've seen organizations that have tried to cost cut, but what happens is that the quality of offer to whether it's children or adults, becomes very much reduced. And the organization puts itself at risk, both in terms financially, but also the role of the regulator, or the increased role of the regulator in making interventions where quality becomes of concern.
Okay. David, you touched on EVP just before, and that kind of brings me on to my next question, which is all around the importance of building a strong EVP. Obviously, with skills shortages becoming more severe in the sector and competition for staff rising, one aspect that's important to any successful candidate attraction strategy is having that strong employee value proposition, which covers anything from flexible working to shift to culture. Our research, which you'll see when you access the report, shows that only 11% of employers have strengthened their EVP in a bid to alleviate the skills gap over the past 12 months. So there's a clear disparity there. So what makes a good EVP in your mind, and how can organisations use it to their advantage when hiring?
Okay. Well, I think the first basis is by CEO understanding what their brand is and what their vision is. And I think everything comes down to what is your vision, mission, and values. What underpins the culture within your organisation? What underpins the environment that people are going to work within? And I think once you've got that clear understanding, you then need to be able to deliver that on a person-centered basis. You know, working within social care, everything is drilled into us around being person-centered, and the same is applicable when you're working as a leader in an organization. You know, within social care, you have generational differences. We have a very young cohort of employees, and we have, you know, a middle-aged and then, you know, a more senior cohort. And each of them will find an element that is more important to them than the other. So as a leader, you've got to really understand what makes people tick. Because for one, it might be a gym membership, and for another, it might be a cash health plan, and for another, it might be a slightly different pension contribution. And I guess the challenge that we face as a leader is trying to firstly delve in and gather that information. So creating a culture whereby people feel comfortable speaking about what is important to them, but also feel like we as a leadership team are actively listening and will act upon that. When you build that culture of transparency and communication and people start to talk about what is important to them, it's then your responsibility to build that into an overarching package. I think culture is one of the most important things, and we've learned that more so over the last couple of years than ever before, when we're trying to encourage people back into the workplace or trying to create the workplace more appealing, trying to also adhere to people's desire to want to have hybrid working and working from home, which in some sectors is incredibly easy. And in others, such as social care, is incredibly hard. You know, unfortunately, my support team, they don't get the benefit of working from home. And there has to be a structure to a rota process for consistency. So we have to look at what's within our remit and what isn't. And I think that really comes down to, what do my team want and how can I make that work? And if you've got that information, then you can move forward.
Thank you, David. Niall, just before I bring you in, it's in a bid to help me manage the questions as they're coming in. We had a question from Farzana. Can you clarify what an EVP is? I think David may have just done so, but in your response, Niall, if you don't mind expanding on that just a little bit.
Yeah, it's not a term I use very often in work, but I'm happy to explain it. It's an employer value proposition. And it really is, it's a coverall term to say, what is it that would attract people to your organization or keep people in your organization? It's a combination of culture and benefits. It's also terms and conditions. But I think if we could replay David's contribution there, he really has described in a very meaningful and personal way what EVP is. It's about being authentic and real as a leader and a representative of brand within your organization, creating powerful and strong relationships between all members of the company where everybody is valued and contributions from all are recognized. And I think that description of differentiated benefits for different people in different parts of the organization really is showing EVP in action. So I commend David for his description. I think it's fantastic. And that is the best description of EVP I can give.
Yeah, to throw a statistic in there, you know, as I mentioned before, our sector heads into regulation in April. And what Ofsted have put forward, or the DFE have put forward, is that they believe there are 1,000 providers, if not 1,200 providers nationally, delivering the same type of service as me as an organization. And so my challenge is, when I'm in a mix of 1,000 other organizations, and that doesn't even touch on the residential providers, what makes me different? How will people be attracted to come and work in my organization? And that responsibility is vast, because actually it's ever changing. Because the system that we're working in is changing, the environment is changing, the demographic of who we work with is changing. And so your EVP cannot be a fixed process. You know, the benefits and the culture and the workplace environment that you build for your team is fluid. And so your response as a leader must always be fluid. It has to have a constant process of review and assessment, and actually going out to your workforce and saying, is this working? Why is it working? Why is it not working? And how can we do it differently? As an organization, we use a fantastic bit of software whereby we do snapshot assessments on the different basis of like health and well-being, job satisfaction, team satisfaction. We do this on a quarterly basis consistently across the board. We have a great uptake in responses. On average, we have about 78% response rate, which is a great representation from the organization. And we take that information in and then we actively change based on it. And I guess your EVP cannot be static. It has to constantly be fluid, because the changes of your team and the environment that we're working is fluid.
Okay, thank you, David. And we touched on benefits as part of an EVP there. So I'll bring in a question from James Moran from Stepping Stones Care. Thanks for your question, James. So James has found that the ripple effect of the increase in pay at entry level and frontline care roles has moved right up the banding. So his view very much is that the market's getting very creative in developing benefits packages to help increase talent attraction and retention. His question is, how do you feel about these benefit packages, and what do you think will be the most important to the candidate market this year, specifically around benefits?
Shall I have a go at that, David?
After you. Who might be next?
I think it is a consultation-based process. So you need to ask your workforce what it is that would be a benefit to them. And it's good to have a suite of benefits that are available that will hit more than one mark. Because as David described, there can be different needs for different people at different stages in their career. I think the greatest benefit for people in MHC is actually the career progression that we offer. I'm very proud to say that I'm a former support worker. I started my career working in a children's home straight from university, and I've worked my way up to the ranks, and I employ and value people who do the same. So that's not to say that we don't take external hires, but we put a lot of effort into developing our people, giving them a career opportunity. And the greatest benefit I can give somebody who's in my employ is to give them the chance to develop themselves and to reach their potential. So the vast majority of my directors are also former support workers, and many of them have a number of years in the front line working with either adults with additional needs or children who require residential care. And the benefit to the organization is that they can, as well as hearing me talk about career progression, they can see it in action. We've also increased our trainee manager schemes to allow people to make the jump from practitioner to manager, which isn't easy. You don't get to become a good manager just by being a good practitioner. There's a whole new skill set that you need to learn in order to manage and run a team, and people need that assistance to make that transition. So in answer to James, I would say, yes, do some consultation, see what your staff team would like as benefits, because it does augment your salary scales, but equally invest in career progression, because that's the greatest gift you can give to the staff.
I'd really echo that as well, Niall, actually, because, you know, one of the things that stood out in the report for me was the percentages. Around 94% of employers believe that their organization would remain the same or grow. And yet only 24% of employees felt there was scope for growth within their role. And that's a real difference. You know, that makes you step back and question, well, if me as a leader, I've got plans for growth, why do my team not feel that they've got plans to grow as well? Because they run systematically, you know, their growth is my growth and vice versa. For me, the most striking thing that I've seen as an employer has been when I've brought on very experienced staff that have not been given the opportunity to fulfill a qualification, you know, and that's been down to a funding basis. And there's a huge amount of grants and accessibility for funding out there already. You just have to be willing to access it and then provide your staff the learning opportunities to do it. One of the standout points of our EVP is dedicated learning hours. That is protected time for career progression and development. And that might be bolted onto some funding for a qualification that they don't yet need, but actually would be really beneficial to them in the future. And I guess you've got the concept of the golden handcuffs. It's about upskilling and building a workforce that are equipped enough to be able to leave you, but feel happy enough to want to stay. And that's not an easy task, but it is achievable.
Very good.
Thank you, David. And before we move on from this section, just to capture a couple more questions, or comments. David, you're getting some homework here. This was a question I was going to ask you, actually, about Karen McCarthy's asked. You mentioned the software before. Can you confirm which software it is? Obviously, some interest in that.
Bamboo HR.
Bamboo HR.
Bamboo HR, they are fantastic. We migrated across to them about a year ago, and it's an incredible, it's not cheap, but it's worthwhile the investment, 100%.
Okay. And then a question from Michelle Cooksey, who asked if it would be possible for David to share the questions you ask quarterly as well. David's nodding, so I'm sure we'll find a way to get them out as appropriate following the session. And just one last one before we move on to the next section. This has come in anonymously. So one of the stats that stands out to this person is that an unfulfilling job was the main reason for employees leaving their jobs last year, replacing pay. They haven't got a specific question, but wondered if we had any more comments on that particular stat. How do we feel about the work being unfulfilling being one of the drivers of people leaving? I'm
happy to jump in on that. I would question if any work in social care is unfulfilling. You know, we're working with people and we have a real responsibility and a privilege to be able to support people, regardless of the role that you hold. You directly impact the lives of some form of vulnerable person. I guess my question would be, how has someone joined a company whereby that work feels unfulfilling, and what responsibilities do we have as a leader to change that culture? Because evidently there's an issue either in the way you're advertising or recruiting or in the team dynamics, because my belief is no social care is unfulfilling.
I'll add to David's. I agree with everything that David has just said. So, but my addition to that is that one of the things I try and drill down to in our services is the levels of autonomy appropriate to role. So if you are looking after a child or an adult with additional needs in one of my services, and that child or adult asks you for something, do you feel empowered and able to reply properly? Or do you say, I'll have to go away and ask someone else? Because that's not a appropriate living experience for that child or adult. That decision-making is held on to so centrally that you have to go and seek either greater guidance or in some cases permission to respond appropriately to the person's request. And that, for me, from both as my experience as a support worker, but also in listening to consultation and feedback with our employees, is one of the greatest frustrations of working in a care organization. It's where that people who don't know the child or the adult as well as you have created restrictions or barriers that make it very difficult to respond to request and need. Now, that doesn't mean that every request and need should get a yes. Yeah, that doesn't mean that every time somebody asks you something, your job is to become, kind of someone who always answers affirmatively, because sometimes the right answer is no. But what you want is a staff team who feel equipped, trained, experienced, supported, enabled to be able to answer those questions and be able to differentiate between what is in the person's best needs, both in the moment and over the long term. In creating cultures where autonomy and the ability to make decisions in real time at the point of contact has led to more fulfilling work for our workforce. So it's one of the things I'd add to David's answer.
Brilliant, thank you, Niall. I'd like to move on to a question here, which was really interesting to me, actually, in the survey's findings. So, survey returned the fact that a large majority of organisations, in response to the skill shortage, have increased their recruitment budgets. However, only 19% have reviewed how they spend that money, looked at their recruitment strategies. Interested to explore that a little bit more. Probably coming to you first, Niall. So how can employers broaden their search for talent when hiring, and have you got any tips?
Yeah, well, I won't try and answer the whole of that question, but I'll tell a story that illustrates how I was forced to think outside the box, because I think that's what you need to do occasionally with recruitment strategy. Doing more of the same doesn't always bring you the best result. As you said in the introduction, MHC runs 3 independent hospitals. Also, some of our care homes are care homes with nursing. That means one of the most important staff groups for us are nurses. When I arrived in September 2020, we were desperately short of nurses. And in some ways, we still are. So in the 2.5 years I've been here, it's been extremely difficult to recruit and retain qualified nurses. We've had to make up the shortfall of qualified nurses through agency nursing, which is extortionately expensive. It's off the scale expensive. And it really is, but you have to keep going onto the telephone to find a nurse until you get one, because your hospital will be out of regulation if you don't have enough qualified nurses on duty. Yeah. So we felt between a rock and a hard place. We didn't know how we were going. We increased our rates of pay to those, I will say, nearly equivalent to the agency rates, but we still couldn't get people who would be willing to come and work for us, possibly due to our rural locations, possibly due to the fact that agency working gives some nurses greater flexibility in choosing which days or shifts that they would like to work. So we're in a dilemma that we didn't know how to get out of. The way that we've resolved it is international recruitment. We were lucky that one of our registered managers of one of our hospitals is from the Gambia, and he had connections back to his teaching university hospital back in the Gambia. MHC was already a sponsor license holder with UK Immigration and Borders through the Home Office. And so we, first of all, began to explore whether it would be possible to recruit some nurses overseas and bring them in. To do so, you need to have that to be a sponsor license holder, but then also have to make sure that the people that you are recruiting are being recruited to an occupation where there is a UK shortage. And it'll surprise nobody on this webinar to know that nurses is a shortage occupation. You also have to bring them in at a salary level, which is above a minimum level set by the Home Office. And thirdly, if they have an international nurse qualification, they're not allowed to work as a nurse immediately. They have to do a transition qualification within their first 6 months of arriving. So we sent our registered manager, who's from the Gambia, plus our HR manager, who had a really nice time, over to the Gambia to do some interviews. There was a very, very high caliber of staff who put themselves forward for potential roles in MHC in the UK. It felt like an embarrassment of riches as opposed to a scarcity. We selected 21 people to come and join our organization, which for us is a huge shot in the arm in nurse recruitment. Each visa you then have to apply for is an individual application. So the visas don't come back as one group. They come back in when each individual assessment has been made. So in January, 9 potential new nurses arrived from the Gambia. In February, 10 further nurses have arrived, and 2 more are due in March to make up the 21 total. The biggest challenge we found post job offer was actually finding them accommodation, because they come from a country where cost of living is a lot less, and obviously their expectation of financial costs is related to their home country, not the UK. So they arrive in the UK to jobs that they're very much looking forward to, but are quite surprised by the cost of living here, including accommodation. So a huge effort was taken to try and find them accommodation, and also then to provide them with transport to and from work. We've also provided them with tutors that will help them pass their nurse qualification in 6 months' time with the NMC. So that's additional expense. So we've flown to the Gambia, we've paid for their flights to come to the UK, we've paid for their visas for them to be cleared to work in the UK, we've helped them with their accommodation, we're providing travel, and we're giving them tutors to be able to support them to pass their exam in 6 months. And all of that is still cost effective based on the rates that we were paying the nurse agencies to replace those workers. But that is quite at the extreme end of reviewing a recruitment strategy. But I didn't feel like I had any choice. I didn't feel like there were any other options that would allow me to have enough nurses in my services.
Yeah, and I imagine we have multiple people on the call today who, if they had the opportunity to hire 21 nurses tomorrow, would take it. So,
yes.
Good to hear that's worked for you. David, before I just bring you in on this, there's a good link to Niall's commentary there, and a question that has come in a little bit earlier, which was around is the rise in salaries rather due to competition between agency workers and permanent employees? This is a question from Annette Luce. Thanks for your question, Annette. So is the salary rise driven by competition between agency workers and permanent employees rather than better skills and experience, which I think certainly talks to your experience in the agency nursing market, which I wouldn't disagree with. Probably also talks from my experience to the locum social work market, which finds that. My own view outside of those markets in in your frontline care, support worker, care worker type roles. I don't feel organisations should be in a position where the agency rates are driving up the cost of or salaries per se. And if you are in that position, I would urge you to reflect on the agencies that you use, if that's the case. But I don't know if you have any view on that, David, specifically.
Well, I'll be honest, Hays is the only agency that we use, so I'm presuming we've made a good choice. You know, I would probably say that I don't believe there's a huge influence there. I think that the challenge that we face is more around permanent recruitment and this desire to attract the right quality, and therefore this competitive nature. I would say that agency spend doesn't necessarily help the circumstance. But I would say the driving factor is competitiveness within the market. Everyone is bidding for the same staff, the same cohort of workforce. And this is why it's obviously important to be creative in the way that you broaden your search for talent. I mean, our experiences is probably not so dramatic as Niall's, I'll be honest. We've probably focused more on a local level, and that's down to things like we have a great aspect of social value pledge, whereby when we launch a new service, we employ local people, we upskill the local workforce using local providers, and this is a big driver in who we are as a provider. Some of the work that we've done is partnering with Wigan and Leigh College, for example, who run a fantastic health and social care program. I believe that they're even trying to build that into a targeted health and social care academy, and actually trying to link with health and social care professionals that are showing a real eye for talent and a desire to progress into employment, and offering those routes into employment on a lower level. You know, we work predominantly with support workers and senior support workers, so our regulation and regime around that is very much different to Niall's. But we obviously also want to make sure that we're bringing on board quality, and that those individuals that we bring into the company can sustain what can often be a really, really challenging role. Other elements that we've done to try and build on our appeal when we're recruiting is actually bringing in some external assessment. Where a best example of that is with Greater Manchester's Good Employment Charter. That's a charter spearheaded by Andy Burnham, designed to increase the employment opportunities for Greater Manchester people and showcase excellence within the employment market. And this was probably quite a grueling task, actually, because it wasn't just a tick box. It was an experience whereby the charter staff came out to us as an employer. They spoke with our staff, they looked at our policies, they looked at what we put into practice, they held us to account, and they told us where we needed to change. And we had to have an openness to change in order to reach that membership level. And we're really proud, actually, because we became the first children's social care provider to reach member status. And of 440,000 businesses in Greater Manchester, there's only 83 on this charter. So it really does create an environment where you can actually showcase that not only do we believe that we're a good employer, but actually we're being chartered and informed that we are by external bodies. That adds some weight when you're attracting new talent. Equally, another initiative that we ran was, well, I believe we're the only supported accommodation provider nationally that works with student social workers, and we're partnered with 10 universities across the country, offering non-statutory placements to students in first and third year. What that also provided us was a different avenue into quality staff, and what we see is that a huge proportion of our bank staff, which is an important part of what we have as a staffing structure, a huge proportion of them are actually previous students that have chosen to stay on with us after placement and work with us around flexibility. The one last thing that I'd probably add is that the importance of, I guess, targeting your recruitment spend, but also matching that spend with an increase in what you're spending in development and training opportunities, because you can pump as much money as you want into your recruitment strategy, but unless you're matching or exceeding that in your retention strategy, you plug in one hole when there's 7. And actually it's really about how you retain the staff more so than how you attract them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, David. Thank you. I'm really conscious of time here. We've got a few more questions to get through. Very, very quick one before we move on from this section to yourself, Niall, from an anonymous attendee. Do you feel an overseas recruitment strategy and getting a sponsorship license would be beneficial within children's homes?
It depends on what the particular problem is. Like I described a very particular set of circumstances where I was looking for qualified staff in a shrinking market, so that the supply was dwindling to zero. So I felt like thinking outside the box was wholly appropriate there. I think in the circumstance where you're looking to use sponsorship license and individual visas to bring in workers to work in a children's home, I think could be part of a blended strategy of many different elements. I'm not sure it's a silver bullet that will solve all ills.
Okay, thank you, Niall. So I'm not avoiding it. It's you getting all the questions. A question has come in from me. Thank you, anonymous attendee. So how are we selling permanent opportunities in social care over temporary and agency opportunities? And it is an interesting question, because we, as a provider of temporary and permanent, we've seen a significant uplift in the amount of permanent roles that we are working on and filling on behalf of our customer base. I think our approach when selling permanent roles is very much about understanding the nature of the conversation we're having today. Actually, we're not selling the nature of a permanent role per se. We're understanding an organisation's EVP and development opportunities within there, and putting the time and the effort into having that conversation as broadly as we can with as many suitable candidates. Agencies like Hays have different ways that we can go to market, which may differ from organisations specifically. Obviously, recruitments are bread and butter, so you'd expect that to be the case. But I think the real value comes from working with a consultant, and hopefully, you experience this when you work with a Hays consultant, who gets to understand your organisation inside out and is able to act as an extension of your organisation in what is, let's face it, really competitive landscape when it comes to recruitment. So the success we have when filling those permanent roles is through elevating the customers that we work with, sort of above and beyond the rest of the market when it comes to trying to attract those staff. So hopefully that answers that one. We've got literally about 5 minutes, well, less than 5 minutes for the final question. We've talked a lot about the importance of career pathways and growth, communicating growth plans. I'm concerned with one of the findings of the report where optimism amongst employees is a lot lower than it is from employers, and a lot of me feels it's a bit of a perception issue. But very quickly, how can leaders communicate your growth plans to staff effectively, and what steps can we take to create clear career pathways? And I'll go to David with that one, David, if you don't mind.
I think I'd start with explaining in my organization, our hierarchy structure is actually an inverted pyramid. So I'm at the very bottom, and I'm the least important. And at the very top, the biggest section is our young people, and below that is our frontline support staff. They use a similar process in journalism, and what they say is that you should always start a message with the conclusion. What are you trying to achieve? When do you want to achieve it? And why are you working towards it? And I think as a CEO, I probably use that same principle when communicating with my staff. What I learned sometimes the hard way was there is an element of oversharing with your staff and causing panic. And then there is an element of undersharing and presuming that information trickles down and not following up on that. And it's about finding a real fair balance and an effective way to communicate a message targeted. We use our software for elements of that, in the sense of we have regular announcements. And these are snapshots of information that are shared, targeted audience or company-wide. We also create a culture whereby there's a lot of honesty and transparency. it's integral in our values that we share information that's needed to be shared when it's needed to be shared. And ultimately, I'm a firm believer that the success of Initio and my organization is only achievable with the success of my staff and their development. I echo what Niall said before. I think some of the best leaders are those that have gone through the ranks and have started as a support worker, and we have an amazing program for homegrown management within this organization. But for me, it's about making sure that the message is consistent and that you're responding to information. So we have a program like a You Said We Did element. We have regular announcements that share progress updates within the company. And where needed, where there's a more difficult message to be shared, we do like snapshot video meetings whereby we invite members of the workforce to join and actually be able to ask questions directly. It's very much an open door policy, but I'm a firm believer that you need to lead with the conclusion. What are you trying to achieve? Get the people to buy into that vision and then work with them on understanding where they fit.
Thank you, David. Niall, I need about a minute at the end, so if you've got anything to add.
No pressure.
Yeah, and again, in addition to what David has said, I would say it's values-based leadership. I think behind me are the MHC values and they're very visible in all of our services. We use them to communicate. So when you're talking about, because the question was a communication about growth, it's also a communication about values. And again, in addition to what David has said, I'd say it's also about relationships and contact. So, there are methods that we can use that can get the message out very quickly, and especially using technology, but there's also a real value in, shaking hands, asking how someone's day is, being interested in them as an individual, and making that part of everything that you do, not just tokenism. So that, everything that David said,
plus the extra bits.
Yeah.
Thank you, Niall. I always think when we organise these sessions, next year I'm going to put an hour and a half in, and I wish I had. I haven't got to my final question, which is around how social care can work together to reclaim the narrative against the kind of prevailing negative narrative that tends to exist in certainly in the media. But we will create an opportunity for people to maybe join that discussion. Let me see if I can bring some slides back up. So the next step for us in terms of continuing this conversation is we've got a series of leadership dinners focused particularly on the learning disability and autism adult sector and the children and young person sector. We've got 2 dinners in Manchester, 2 dinners in Birmingham booked in currently, and these will be the part of an ongoing programme that we will have throughout the year. So if you've enjoyed today's discussions, you found it informative and collaborative, please do consider attending, if possible, these dinners. Places are strictly limited. Different we can accommodate a different number of people in Manchester to Birmingham, but if you are interested, we're going to send out links along with the links to the report after this call, so do have a look at that. And you can access the full findings on the link that you see in front of you. So it's hayes.co.uk/social-care-salaries. So click on that link. You just have to drop your contact information in there, so we're able to grant you access to it, and one of our consultants will talk you through the guide in full. There's a lot more detail in there than we've been able to get into today, so hopefully you find the report itself useful, and hopefully everyone has found today's session useful. We've got a number of questions I haven't been able to get to, so apologies for that, but if those questions came through with your name on them, we'll pick them up after the session and make contact with you and provide any responses that may have been requested. Okay. Niall, David, I've really enjoyed the last hour. I do wish we had more. I genuinely appreciate all of the time you've given to support the launch of this as well. And I'm sure people who've joined the call also feel that way as well. So that pretty much draws us to a close. We're only 1 minute overdue, which I think is a small success. So thank you everyone for joining the call today. do request access to the guide, and do come and join us on one of those leadership dinners if it's at all possible for you to do so. Thank you all.